Welcome to The Objective Dad. Today is Tuesday, April 14th. My name is Matt, and today we're going to talk about philosophy and everyday life. This video was highly inspired by an address that Ayn Rand gave to a graduating class at West Point on March 6, 1974. And I really like this address because I think it brought philosophy and a very complicated topic directly to an audience in a very simple and useful way. And I've appreciated that for years. So I wanted to try to kind of grab some of the essence of that and create my own video. And I want to start off by saying that philosophy isn't always an academic exercise. Yes, there are college professors and I would say professional philosophers, and this is, that is academic, and it's actually very important. So this is not intended to be an academic video. I want to kind of focus on philosophy and how it's about you and what you choose to do with your life. And I want to start by saying that philosophy is just one of those things that really helps you pursue the longest term goals. And a great analogy that kind of comes to mind is that philosophy is a lot like gravity. It's always on, and it's wherever you go. You as long as you're on planet Earth, you can't escape the effects of gravity. And for most folks, unless you are a specialist and you're able to go into space, or you're a scientist and work for NASA or SpaceX, unless you're in one of these very specific fields, you really don't notice it. Think about that. How many hours a year do you think about gravity versus how many hours a year does gravity impact you? Philosophy is kind of the same way. Like gravity, philosophy, I think, is sort of this hidden topic because it's so widespread. Because philosophy addresses foundational elements. I think just because it's everywhere, it's just a little bit harder to see. Because it's not always in your face in a very direct way. So I want to kind of avoid definitions, but I'll say just generally, philosophy studies the foundations of reality and knowledge and ethics. And it's a little bit broader than just that, but I think for this video, that's going to be a great place to start. And like in the West Point speech that I mentioned a minute or so ago, I'm going to attempt to bring this directly to the audience, really by exploring three foundational questions. It's always best to go with a real example, and I'll kind of look at three different questions. The first one is, what's real? And how do you know is the second one. And the third one is, what should you do? So if you think about that, that kind of covers the three topics. What's real? That's reality. That's the study and the understanding of reality. How do you know? Well, that's the study and the understanding of knowledge. And what should you do? That's the study of and the understanding of ethics. So let's take this apart a little bit. And I think that starting at the very beginning, I'm going to kind of, go over this as almost like a process. So as I'm kind of talking through this, think that this is just going to occur over and over and over and over again during the course of somebody's lifetime. So I'll start by saying that reality is observed by your senses. So you see things, out there when you look at the world. You hear things, you interact with people, you tie your shoes, you get up in the morning, you do all these things, and you really start to interact and observe. You are an observer of reality through your senses. And that's key. You want to make sure that when new information comes to you, that it's not that the information isn't originating from some random idea in your head. You want to make sure that it's based off of something that you observed out there in the world, in reality. And that's really the crux of it. I'm not going to give a lecture on how existence is axiomatic and everything like that. I think from a practical standpoint, you really want to just understand that a reality is what it is. it doesn't care how you feel or anything about you. It just does what it does. It's just kind of this neutral, constant thing that we all live in. And certainly there's folks that deny reality, but let's just talk about, from a practical standpoint, this is the reality that we live in and we experience. So that's the only one I'm going to focus on. So you observe that through your senses. And if you kind of think about this, the data comes in through your senses, if I see something, and it provides data for my concepts. So let me give you an example. If I go look over in the corner and I see a table, I can do an experiment. If I close my eyes, I can still picture, the essence and the elements of those table. Now, that doesn't mean I have a table in my head. What that means is that because the way that my brain and my consciousness work, when I go out and I look and I see a table, that provides some data, and that data exists in my consciousness, and I can start to use that to form concepts. And that's a really key distinction here. And I'm just going to spend a moment about it, because what we just did is we sort of bridged the gap between what's out there in the world, which is, reality. Via our senses, we brought that data into our mind, and now there's stuff going on in our mind. And those are separate. So no matter how hard I wish for something in my mind, it's not going to, in a direct way, impact the world outside. I can't will or think or wish something into existence out there. Reality doesn't care what I think for the most part. And so that's a really key distinction. And this is where things start to get hard, because now that I have this data coming in and I have this concept of a table, I need to think about it. So thinking is an active process. And in a very broad sense, I'm going to integrate and combine all of these concepts that come in from observing reality. I'm going to combine them into higher and higher level concepts. So let's take an example. Maybe I see a table over there, and maybe I see a bench over in the hallway, and I see a chair. So all these things are, are concrete objects that I can observe out there in the world. When I grab that data and I form the concepts of a table and a chair and a bench, I can start to look at the similarities and differences between these things that I see. So maybe I integrate table and chair and bench into a higher level concept. Furniture. If I look around, furniture doesn't exist anywhere out there in the world. It's only going to be, tables and benches and chairs and stools. Excuse me, those are all the concretes. But the way that I start to integrate these into higher and higher and more abstract concepts, that's kind of the way that the mind works. So it's really important to think about these concepts and the things that you observe. So what are some common mistakes? You really want to avoid things that are arbitrary. And when I say arbitrary in this context, I mean I start from a concept first. So I might start with an idea that all bald people are bad people. So full disclosure, I don't have any hair. But so if I start with that, I can hold that idea and I can alter my life and adjust in such a way that, if I act that all bald people are just bad people fundamentally, then I can use that to drive my life. But that doesn't make it real out there in the world. And again, I'm going to go back to this. There's a clear divide about what exists in your mind versus out there in the world. So when you integrate these concepts, you have to do in a very diligent and specific and reasonable way, because anything can't be anything out there in the world, but you can make mistakes all day long in your mind, when you're dealing with these concepts. So, and kind of looking at the question of how do you know what you know, you first observe out there in the world with your senses. You get these concepts and you figure out how all of these concepts are related to each other, and you think about them. So moving on to the next piece, when I think about these concepts and I get an understanding of reality and my consciousness, that thinking drives my judgment. And now we're kind of bridging the gap to ethics, because ethics really answers the question, what should you do? And it's a giant topic that's really out of scope for this video, but the essence of it is your what you know drives how you see the world. And back to the negative example, if I believe that all bald people are going to just do bad rotten things, then then I'm going to make these judgments on them. And when I start to judge my knowledge, that's going to motivate what I do. And this is really the key to completing this whole cycle, because what I do impacts the world. It impacts reality. If I act on that belief that all bald people are going to do just bad, terrible things, and I act on that, reality is probably not going to give me what I want, or at least it won't give me what I want as efficiently as if I had a more reasonable belief that it doesn't matter how much hair you have, it matters what you do. So let me go through this cycle just once. That really completes it. When discussing what's real, we start with reality, and that's observed by your senses. Your senses provide data for your concepts in your mind. They're integrated by this process of thinking, which drives your judgment, which motivates your actions, which then impacts reality, and the cycle starts all over again. And that's pretty much it from a super high level standpoint. The only other major point that I want to kind of pick on for the moment is that in a lifetime, you go through this process over and over and over and over again. So you want to make sure that you execute it as consistently as possible. And if philosophy is about, achieving a long-term goal, it's really about making sure that, what's in your mind, it matches as closely as possible to what's out there in the world. And that's really where the key to this, to this actually benefiting you as a human being is. And I'm going to give you 3 scenarios. Let's say that you want to become a doctor. This is going to take probably over a decade of your life if you're completely committed to it. And I'm thinking, you have to get your pre-med bachelor's degree. So, bam, there's 4 years. You have to study and you have to pass the MCAT. You have to, then go to medical school, and earn your medical degree. And then you have to complete your residency. And then you have to work to get your license. And I left out the parts about, how are you going to finance all of this? So becoming a doctor is this really long-term goal, which is going to be extremely challenging and extremely difficult, and it's because it's extremely important. So 3 scenarios becoming a doctor. There is, if I look at if I look at point A of where I'm at now and point B is becoming a doctor, the perfect ideal run, might be, I'm going to do it, 10 or 11 years, let's say, and I'm going to go straight from point A to point B, and that's a very idealistic way to look at it, because life happens. Maybe you're a little bit older and you want to start a family, and it takes you an extra year. There's all sorts of stuff that can happen. But the ideal scenario is just to go bam, from point A to point B in one perfect run. The worst approach, I would say, is just kind of the random zigzag approach. So rather than a straight line, if I want to go from point A to point B, if I start zigzagging all over the place, if I'm inconsistent with my choices and I have to keep getting back on track, maybe eventually I'll meet my goal. But it would only be by chance, and it's certainly not an efficient way to go. The realistic situation is small corrections along the way. So rather than a straight line, usually what happens when most people achieve a goal is going from point A to point B. You start here, and then maybe you veer off a little bit, and you realize you're veering, and then you kind of go back. So you make these small corrections along the way. And that's really what this philosophical process is intended to do, because I'm executing it over and over and over and over again. I'm going to constantly reevaluate what's real and adjust my thinking and adjust what's in my mind so that it's going to drive better judgment and motivate more precise actions that's going to lead me to my goal out there in reality. So that's the punchline, and that's kind of the plug for making sure that you execute a process like this very consistently. So in conclusion, I just wanted to recap. We talked about the relationships between the three fundamental philosophical questions: what's real, how do you know, and what should you do? And we talked about how they guide your choices and actions over the long-term goal. And I just want to say, in future videos, I'll be sure to refer back to this one to really demonstrate this process with more and more real examples, because it's everywhere, and it's just like the gravity analogy. Sometimes it's hard to see. And so wrapping up, I'd like to say thank you for watching. I appreciate folks that spend the time to watch these videos. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and a comment. If you want to see more content like this, please subscribe, and have a great rest of the day.